The war that will shake the fate of the world itself? Did I just read that correctly? Oda really keeps throwing me off with my expectations for this arc. It looks like the Fire Festival might turn out to be more than just a big battle. Chapter 955 of One Piece is out, and of course, after expecting the end of Act 2 in Wano for a couple of chapters now, today was the first time I didn't think of it. And what happens? Act 2 over. Well, I can't really argue that the timing isn't fitting, but maybe Oda could have revealed the Big Mom and Kaido alliance this chapter? Well, no use wondering now. It's not like I mind. After all, this was a really amazing chapter to end the second act on anyway. As always, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this chapter and answer some of your questions, so definitely make sure to drop a comment and if you enjoy this review, maybe even a like. But now, let's jump right into the chapter. This week, I think the cover page deserves a mention. While last chapter we saw Betch and his crew fail to cross the red line into paradise, they now have found their way to Dressrosa. And I'm not exactly sure where Oda is going with this, but I'm sure we will be seeing one or the other familiar face next week. We start off the chapter back where we started this arc, in Amigasa village in Curry, where Kawamatsu finally reveals to the others that Hiyori is alive and safe. And as we could expect, all of the Scabbards as well as Momo are deeply relieved to hear these news. Momo then thanks Zoro for protecting his sister, remembering how she used to flying kick him, which is pretty hilarious, and tells Zoro that she's a big crybaby. Once again, we get one of those unexpected reactions from Zoro, where instead of making fun of it or ignoring it, he actually stands up for Hiyori and tells Momo to stop living in the past. I don't know about you guys, but I really like that development in Zoro. And yes, I know I mentioned that a lot, but it just keeps happening, like also in this next scene where Sanji confronts Zoro about staying with the princess. This used to be a typical starting point for one of their brawls, but Zoro doesn't seem to lose his cool anymore. Also, I think it's really interesting that this is the first proper exchange we see between the two of them since meeting again. I guess the topic of Big Mom will become relevant again when the Straw Hats find out that she has now teamed up with Kaido. Pretty much exactly what Zoro was afraid of in the first place. Now though, let's get to the sword part of this chapter. Firstly, Kiku returns the Nidai Kitetsu to Hitetsu, which Luffy had taken away from him. I'm not gonna lie, I really hoped that Luffy would do something with the sword, but then again it definitely wouldn't have made sense in the fight against Kaido. Zoro of course immediately recognizes the blade as well. Hitetsu meanwhile reveals that he was the one who had kept Oden's two blades safe for the past 20 years, which once again raises the question, who is this guy? I mean, yes, he's a renowned bladesmith, but that's no reason for Oden to entrust him with his two blades for his children. So there must be some sort of other relationship here that we're still unaware of. On the next page, we get a possible explanation for this though. As Hitetsu offers Abe no Habakiri to Momo, he calls it his masterpiece, suggesting that he was actually the one that created the blade. Now, that would of course be a pretty big deal, but I'm sure we will learn more about Hitetsu at some point in the story. Meanwhile, the bladesmith reveals that both the Abe no Habakiri as well as Enma are both part of the 21 Owasemono swords. So while they're not part of the 12 supreme swords, they are still in the same class as Shusui and also the Nidai Kitetsu. I have to admit that I believed last week that Hiyori had already traded swords with Zoro, while many other people thought Zoro would be getting the sword at the end of the arc, if at all. Well, turns out we were all wrong. Zoro is now handed Enma by Hitetsu, which he really needs if we're honest, because how exactly are the Straw Hats gonna survive against not one, but two Yonko if Zoro's not at full strength? What truly blew my mind though is what follows next, because now we learn a lot more about the nature of swords in the One Piece world. And I know that this has been an endless debate in the community, but it turns out that certain swords actually do give their wielders certain powers if they're able to tame them. As immediate proof, we see Zoro attempting to cut down a tree, which results in him cutting off the entire cliff in one swing. However, the blade immediately starts to drain the life force out of Zoro's arm. As Hitetsu explains, the blade requires an unusual amount of haki from its wielder, but in return will create unusually large strikes. Zoro, of course, is up to the challenge and gives us some sweet foreshadowing that he will become even stronger with this sword in his hands. At this point, I'm really curious what Oda's plans are with him this arc. What do you guys think? A little later in the chapter, when Zoro is training with his new blade, Hitetsu actually reveals to him that the Sandai Kitetsu is actually also one of his creations. Which makes me wonder, why is it then called Kitetsu after his ancestor and not Hitetsu? But I'm sure there's also an explanation for that. Hitetsu seems to suggest that the Sandai, similar to Enma, cannot be wielded by the weak. And to me, that kind of sounds like the Kitetsu blades were never cursed in the first place, but simply were special weapons that require a strong wielder in order to be able to use their true power. So now, of course, Zoro's last sword also has to get some mention. And oh surprise, Hitetsu knows about the Wado Ichimonji as well. And the reason for that is that it was made by the same person who created Enma, Shimotsuki Kozaburo, who left Wano 50 years ago illegally. Now, at this point, I think we can stop the speculation and say that it's no coincidence that the village Zoro's dojo was located in has the same name as this clan from Wano, and that Kuina, the daughter of his sensei, had the Wado Ichimonji in her possession. I think we can say pretty comfortably now that Kyushiro is actually Shimotsuki Kozaburo. Also, Hitetsu mentions that Enma hasn't become a black blade yet, and that he's convinced that in Zoro's hands it will reach that level. Which can't even be called foreshadowing anymore, but it's still pretty exciting nonetheless. Now, once again, we get a fast forward towards the Fire Festival, where we get another overview of all the preparations happening all over the country. It looks like Oda has taken up the challenge to let all of the Straw Hats shine in their professions once again, since this chapter Robin is the one to reveal the intel she has gathered in her time undercover. She reveals that the Beast Pirates are 20,000 men strong, which is a crazy number no matter how you look at it. And these will also be joined by Orochi and 10,000 men of his own, bringing the enemy's number to a startling 30,000. And don't forget, Big Mom is also there, and we don't know if she managed to contact her crew or maybe even bring in more troops from Hokage Island. Comparatively, the 4,200 men that the Alliance has gathered so far seems rather hopeless. Frankie, however, gives us a bit of hope when he bets that they will get at least 10,000 men in the end. Maybe this is some foreshadowing, or maybe also just an empty hope. But wouldn't the Straw Hat Grand Fleet with its roughly 5,700 men add up pretty nicely with the 4,200 we have so far? Just throwing it out there. Meanwhile, we see Luffy in his badass Snake Man form, still training his new form of armament. I kind of like how this training is not really shown too much, because the results will be a lot more hype to witness in a real fight for the first time, similar to how it happened with Gear 2nd or Gear 3rd. In Curry, meanwhile, Zoro is training together with Momo, and here it suddenly gets very interesting again. When Momo asks Zoro about the phrase Sunachi that he was told not to use by Kiku, Zoro tells him that he picked up this phrase from the elder people back in his village. Which is kind of a big deal, no? I mean, this either means that Zoro grew up in Wano or that he grew up in a village where people from Wano lived. And based on all the hints we have gotten so far from Oda, it really looks like the first option is a lot more likely. I don't know about you guys, but it looks more and more to me as if this arc will be focused on Zoro almost as much as it is on Luffy. Though, of course, Luffy has really been buffing up lately. And speaking of Luffy, the next day, him, Chopper, and Tama arrive back in Curry, Luffy being completely knocked out from his training. Finally, the day before the festival arrives, and everyone gets ready to set out for the harbor. And all over the country, we can see the citizens of Wano whispering about the possible revolution, which gets us a real feeling of how badly everyone wants to be free of Kaido and Orochi. And then we get another really exciting scene for all of you who are on board with the Carrot Conspiracy. We see Robin, Toko, and the Minks in front of two new gravestones. One for Yasu and one for Pedro. And we can see Wanda crying in front of his grave. And then we see Carrot, who has been eerily absent this entire arc and now just stands there with a pretty blank expression. I don't know guys, I honestly didn't think too much of the theory that Carrot is the traitor, but her behavior since coming to Wano has been seriously weird. What do you think? Is she just less important to the story right now, or does she play a hidden game that we just don't know of yet? Finally, we arrive back in the Flower Capital, where we find out that once again, the traitor has betrayed the Alliance plans. And we now also know that it has to be someone who was present in Curry, since he or she tells Orochi about Hiyori and where she's hidden. The traitor, it looks like, must be someone pretty important, since he has access to that very sensitive information. And finally, we see Law with a determined look on his face, his intentions still made pretty unclear by Oda. And with that, Act 2 of Wano comes to an end, and the war that will shake the fate of the Earth will begin next chapter. My god, I can't wait that long. What to say guys, this chapter didn't have as many crazy things happening as the last one, but it was honestly almost as amazing for me. This chapter was very Zoro heavy, but also a lot of other stuff happened. Zoro actually got Enma to be at full power before the big battle. We learned a lot more about the special powers of the Swords of Wano, and we got teased a lot more about Zoro's past. But I think we also shouldn't forget that Luffy's training, while a lot more subtle, is just as hype. And I can't wait to see his new skills in action. Finally, we learn that the traitor has once again made his move, and Carrot is more and more suspicious to me. All in all guys, I really love this chapter. There was so much detail hidden in all the scenes that I might have missed a thing or two. But luckily I have all of you, so please let me know your thoughts and opinions about this chapter. And let's talk about all that happened together. So don't forget to leave a comment, and if you enjoyed this review, also leave me a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. But of course, as always, you can also dislike, don't share and unsubscribe. It's a free world, people. I hope to see you around next time here for the start of the Great War, and until then, have a great week.